The saddest songs are often the ones almost nobody hears. Every weekday morning at exactly 8:15, the front entrance of Walker Holdings welcomed a familiar parade of polished shoes, expensive briefcases, hurried conversations, and black luxury sedans gliding toward the towering glass building that reflected the Chicago skyline like a mirror reaching into the winter sky. Thousands of employees crossed the plaza without ever looking up. They hurried toward meetings, elevators, deadlines, and another day measured by calendars instead of memories. Standing only a few yards away, beside an old iron bench dusted with a thin layer of fresh snow, a little girl quietly adjusted the worn leather strap of an aging acoustic guitar almost as large as she was. She could not have been older than 8. Her neatly brushed blonde hair rested beneath a soft knitted cream hat, while her pale blue winter coat and white mittens made her seem almost part of the snowy morning itself. Her bright blue eyes carried an unusual calm, the kind that belonged to someone who had already learned how precious simple smiles could be. She looked toward the stream of strangers passing by, took one slow breath, and began to sing. Her voice was gentle rather than powerful, soft enough that the city almost swallowed it beneath distant traffic, rumbling buses, and the occasional whistle of the elevated train. Yet somehow the melody floated between the skyscrapers with remarkable warmth, as though it had no interest in competing with the noise around it. It simply waited patiently for someone willing to listen. Most people never did. Some glanced toward her for barely a second before checking their phones again. Others dropped a few dollar bills into the small open guitar case resting near her boots without slowing their pace. A few smiled politely before disappearing through the revolving glass doors of Walker Holdings. The little girl thanked every person exactly the same way, with a grateful nod and the same quiet smile, never asking anyone to stop, never asking anyone to stay. Several stories above the plaza, Ethan Walker stood beside the floor-to-ceiling windows of his executive office, holding a porcelain coffee cup that had already grown cold in his hand. At 44 years old, the white Millionaire CEO had built one of the city's most respected investment companies through discipline, precision, and relentless determination. His tailored navy suit fit perfectly, his office overlooked Lake Michigan, and every achievement he had ever chased surrounded him in polished wood, elegant glass, and framed awards lining the walls. Yet every morning began exactly the same way. One cup of untouched coffee. One silent office. One empty chair across from his desk that no visitor ever occupied for long. His enormous grand piano rested beneath another window in the corner of the office, its polished black surface reflecting the winter sunlight while a thin layer of dust quietly settled across untouched ivory keys. Years had passed since anyone had played a single note. Ethan rarely noticed it anymore. He had become just as skilled at ignoring silence as he had become at building success. He reached for his coat, preparing for another meeting across town, when something unusual drifted faintly through the insulated glass. It was only a fragment of a melody. Barely noticeable. Soft enough that he almost convinced himself he had imagined it. Then came a single lyric, carried upward by the cold morning air with impossible clarity. Even empty windows can learn to shine again. Ethan stopped walking. His hand remained frozen on the office door handle. Something about those words reached a place inside him that quarterly reports, congratulatory speeches, and years of professional success had never been able to touch. For reasons he could not explain, he slowly turned away from his schedule, walked back toward the towering window overlooking the plaza below, and searched through the moving crowd until his eyes found the tiny figure standing alone in the snow, still singing as though one listening heart would always be enough. For nearly 3 weeks, Ethan found himself pausing at the same window every morning without admitting to himself why. His executive assistant believed he had developed a new habit of reviewing pedestrian traffic before the first meeting of the day. His board members assumed he was studying the city before another round of decisions worth millions of dollars. None of them knew he was searching for one small figure wrapped in a pale blue winter coat. Every morning at exactly 8:15, she arrived carrying the same weathered acoustic guitar in a protective fabric case that had clearly been repaired more than once. She always brushed a few snowflakes from the old wooden bench before placing the open guitar case neatly beside her feet. She carefully tuned each string, smiled at the people rushing toward the revolving doors, and began another song as though she had never noticed how few people truly listened. Ethan started recognizing the pattern before he realized he was waiting for it. Monday brought gentle melodies about hope. Tuesday carried quiet songs about family. Wednesday sounded brighter, almost playful. Every lyric felt handwritten rather than borrowed, simple enough for a child to understand yet somehow wise enough to linger long after the music faded into the city noise. He never saw her asking anyone for money. When someone placed a few bills into the guitar case, she simply thanked them with a grateful smile before continuing the next verse without interruption. If nobody stopped, she sang anyway. That puzzled Ethan more than anything else. Success had taught him that every action usually had a measurable purpose. Yet this little girl behaved as though singing itself was already enough. One unusually cold Thursday morning, heavy gray clouds settled above Chicago while icy wind swept through the financial district. Employees hurried inside with scarves pulled tightly around their faces. Ethan watched the plaza from his office window, expecting the bench to remain empty. Instead, right on schedule, the little girl appeared from the subway entrance carrying her guitar against the wind. She stamped her small boots gently to keep warm, adjusted her cream-colored hat, and smiled toward the towering building exactly as she always did. Ethan found himself smiling without realizing it. It was brief, almost unfamiliar, disappearing as quickly as it had arrived. His reflection in the glass surprised him more than the music below. He could not remember the last morning that had begun with anything other than another schedule, another contract, or another silent cup of coffee. As the girl finished her first song, an elderly janitor from the building stepped outside carrying 2 steaming paper cups. He handed one to her with the easy familiarity of an old friend. She accepted it with both mittened hands, laughed softly, and thanked him before offering him the first warm smile Ethan had seen all week. The old man stayed only long enough to hear a few lines before returning inside. Ethan quietly asked his assistant over the office intercom, "Who is the little girl outside every morning?" His assistant hesitated. "I am not sure, sir. I have seen her for months, but nobody seems to know much about her." Ethan looked down again. Months. She had been standing beneath his office window for months while he had walked past every morning without hearing a single note. He loosened his tie, picked up his coat, canceled the first meeting on his calendar for the first time in years, and instead of calling for the private elevator, he pressed the button for the lobby, feeling an unfamiliar curiosity quietly leading him somewhere his carefully planned schedule never had. The elevator doors opened onto the marble lobby with their familiar whisper, but for the first time in years Ethan Walker stepped outside without anyone walking beside him, carrying no briefcase, answering no phone calls, and thinking about nothing except the quiet melody drifting through the revolving doors ahead. The moment he stepped into the crisp winter air, the city sounded different. Taxi horns echoed farther away, footsteps blended into a steady rhythm across the plaza, and somewhere between the rushing crowd and the towering buildings, the little girl's voice floated gently through the morning like sunlight finding its way between clouds. She was finishing another song when she noticed him approaching. Instead of becoming nervous, she simply smiled the same warm smile she seemed to offer every stranger. Ethan stopped a few feet away, careful not to interrupt the final notes. Around them, dozens of employees hurried past without slowing, their attention fixed on schedules and phones. When the song ended, the little girl carefully lowered her guitar and tucked a loose strand of blonde hair beneath her cream-colored hat. "Good morning," she said cheerfully. "Good morning," Ethan replied, surprised by how unfamiliar those simple words felt outside a boardroom. For a brief moment neither of them spoke. The wind carried a few tiny snowflakes across the open plaza while steam rose from nearby coffee cups. Ethan glanced toward the open guitar case resting beside her boots. Only a handful of folded dollar bills and a few coins lay inside. "You have a beautiful voice," he said. "Thank you," she answered. My dad used to say every song deserves at least one listener. Ethan looked at the old guitar more closely. Its wooden finish had faded with time, and several careful repairs along the edges revealed years of faithful use rather than neglect. Did your father teach you to play? The little girl nodded proudly. Every Saturday morning. He said songs are like letters. They can reach people you have never met. Ethan found himself smiling again. What is your name? Lily Bennett. I am Ethan. She tilted her head slightly before laughing softly. I know. Ethan looked surprised. You do? She pointed toward the enormous glass building behind him. Everybody around here knows who you are. You own the tallest building on the block. Her answer carried no admiration and no resentment, only simple honesty. Ethan laughed quietly, the sound almost unfamiliar to his own ears. That is true. Lily looked up at the shimmering windows stretching high into the gray sky. It is a beautiful building. Then she added gently, I always wonder if the people working way up there can hear the songs. Ethan followed her gaze toward his office window, now reflecting the winter clouds above Chicago. Most of them probably cannot, he admitted. Lily did not seem disappointed. Instead, she reached into the side pocket of her guitar case and carefully removed a folded sheet of music covered with neat pencil handwriting. She held it out with both mittened hands. Then maybe someone can hear this instead. Ethan accepted the page carefully. At the top she had written a simple title, The Window That Learned to Smile. Beneath it, every lyric had been written by hand in careful letters. At the bottom of the page, one sentence stood alone. Even if only one heart listens today, the song has already found its home. Ethan stared quietly at the words while the city hurried around them exactly as before. For the first time in many years, the next meeting waiting on his calendar no longer felt like the most important appointment of his morning. The handwritten sheet of music remained folded inside Ethan's coat pocket for the rest of the day, though he found himself touching it several times without realizing it was there. Every meeting seemed strangely quieter than usual, every presentation less urgent than the melody still echoing somewhere in the back of his mind. Late that afternoon, after the final executive briefing had ended and the conference room slowly emptied, Ethan walked past the grand piano standing beneath the wide office window. He paused in front of it for the first time in years. A thin layer of dust rested across the polished lid, soft enough that his fingertips left a clean line when he brushed the surface. He gently lifted the cover and looked down at the silent ivory keys. He remembered another winter many years earlier, when his younger sister had filled their childhood home with music every evening before dinner. She believed every house needed at least one song each day. After she passed away unexpectedly as a young adult, Ethan had quietly closed the piano and buried himself in work, convincing himself that achievements could fill spaces where music once lived. Standing alone in the fading afternoon light, he finally understood they never had. The following morning, he arrived at the office nearly 30 minutes earlier than usual. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, covering the plaza in a smooth blanket of white untouched except for a few early footprints leading toward the familiar iron bench. Right on schedule, Lily appeared carrying her weathered guitar case across the square. Before opening it, she carefully brushed the snow from the bench with one mittened hand, smiling to herself as though even small acts of care deserved attention. Ethan watched from the lobby instead of his office window this time. When she finished tuning the guitar, he stepped outside carrying 2 steaming cups of hot chocolate from the cafe inside the building. Lily looked up with pleasant surprise as he approached. "Good morning, Ethan," she said naturally, as though greeting an old friend rather than one of the city's most successful executives. "Good morning, Lily," he answered, offering one of the cups. "I thought singing in this weather might be easier with something warm." She accepted it with both hands, her blue eyes brightening immediately. "Thank you." She took one careful sip before smiling. "This tastes like Christmas." Ethan laughed softly. "I will take that as a compliment." They stood quietly together for a moment while employees streamed past them into the building. Some glanced curiously toward the unexpected sight of the company's chief executive standing beside the little street musician instead of hurrying toward the elevators. Ethan noticed the curious looks but did not seem to mind. "Do you always come before school?" he asked. Lily nodded. "I sing until 8:45. Then I take the bus." "Does your school know you perform here?" "Yes. My principal says music is a good way to begin the day if homework is finished first." Ethan smiled again. "That sounds like wise advice." Lily looked toward the towering glass windows reflecting the morning sky. "My mom says people carry invisible things inside them. Some carry worries. Some carry lonely days. She says songs help make those things a little lighter." Ethan looked around at the hundreds of people passing without slowing their pace. For years he had believed leadership meant carrying every burden alone. Listening to Lily, he began wondering whether even the strongest people sometimes needed someone willing to sing hope into an ordinary morning. As she lifted the guitar and played the first gentle chords of another original melody, Ethan quietly stepped aside, not because he wanted to leave, but because he had finally learned that the best way to honor a beautiful song was simply to become the listener it had been waiting for all along. Over the following week, Ethan's mornings quietly transformed into something his calendar had never been designed to measure. Instead of arriving moments before the first executive meeting, he reached the office early enough to hear Lily's first song from beginning to end. Without anyone asking, the cafe downstairs began preparing 2 cups of hot chocolate every weekday at exactly 8 o'clock. The barista smiled each morning as Ethan picked them up himself, declining every offer to have an assistant do it instead. The routine became wonderfully simple. Lily tuned her old guitar beside the iron bench. Ethan handed her a warm drink. Then the music filled the plaza while another busy day awakened around them. One snowy Friday, after finishing a gentle melody about finding light on cloudy mornings, Lily carefully placed the guitar across her lap. Ethan noticed her fingers tracing the worn edges of the instrument with unusual affection. "Your guitar has been with you for a long time," he said. She nodded. "It belonged to my dad." Her smile softened, filled with quiet memories instead of sadness. "He played on sidewalks all over Chicago before I was born. He always said music should go wherever people need hope the most." Ethan looked closely at the instrument. Tiny scratches covered the wooden body. One corner had been repaired with careful craftsmanship, and the leather strap showed signs of years of faithful use. Nothing about it was expensive, yet everything about it suggested love. "Did he teach you every song?" Ethan asked. Lily shook her head gently. "He taught me how to listen first." Ethan looked puzzled. Lily smiled. "He said every city already has music. The trains. The wind. People's footsteps. Even silence has its own rhythm if you are patient enough." Ethan found himself looking across the plaza in a completely different way. Office workers crossing the pavement, distant traffic, church bells several blocks away, the soft scrape of snow shovels clearing sidewalks, and Lily's gentle breathing before she sang suddenly blended together into something he had never noticed during all his years inside the city. "Your father sounds like he was very wise," Ethan said quietly. Lily nodded. "Before he became very sick, he made me promise something." She looked down at the guitar before continuing. "He said, never stop singing just because people keep walking. If even one heart slows down, your song already mattered." Ethan remained silent. He realized those words described much more than music. They described leadership, friendship, kindness, and every meaningful conversation he had postponed because business always seemed more urgent. As Lily began packing away the guitar before catching her school bus, Ethan noticed one of the tuning pegs slipping slightly loose. She adjusted it without complaint, clearly accustomed to the old instrument needing constant care. "Does it stay in tune very well?" he asked. Lily laughed softly. Not always. It is getting old, but I think it still has plenty of songs left. Ethan watched her zip the faded case closed with extraordinary care, as though protecting something priceless. While she hurried toward the approaching city bus, he remained standing beside the now quiet bench, his eyes resting on the place where the music had just been. For the first time in many years, he did not think about stock prices, acquisitions, or executive meetings. Instead, he thought about an old guitar that refused to stop making beautiful music, and he quietly wondered whether people, like instruments, sometimes only needed someone willing to believe they still had songs left to give. The following Monday, Ethan arrived carrying something besides 2 cups of hot chocolate. Resting carefully inside a long navy fabric case was his own quiet secret, one that had remained untouched for nearly 15 years. After Lily finished her morning song, she noticed the unfamiliar case leaning gently against the iron bench. "What is that?" she asked with curious eyes. Ethan smiled, almost shyly. "I thought perhaps you could help me remember something." He slowly unzipped the case, revealing the polished black violin that had belonged to his younger sister. The wood still reflected the winter sunlight with remarkable beauty, although it had not been played since the day he carefully stored it away after her passing. Lily looked at the instrument with respectful wonder rather than excitement. "It is beautiful," she whispered. Ethan nodded. "She used to practice every evening. I promised myself I would learn someday so we could play together." He paused before continuing. "I never kept that promise." Lily remained quiet, understanding that some silences deserved kindness instead of questions. She gently reached toward the violin but stopped before touching it. "May I?" Ethan handed it to her with great care. She examined it as though holding a treasured memory instead of an expensive instrument. "My dad always said instruments remember every hand that ever loved them," she said softly. "Maybe this one has been waiting for you." Ethan looked toward the towering glass building behind them. "I am not sure I remember how to begin." Lily smiled warmly. "Songs begin the same way conversations do. One note at a time." Those simple words lingered in Ethan's thoughts long after Lily boarded her school bus. Later that afternoon, instead of returning directly to another meeting, he unlocked the small music room that occupied a quiet corner of the executive floor, a room almost no employee knew existed. The grand piano rested beneath tall windows overlooking Lake Michigan exactly as it had for years. Sunlight stretched across the polished floor while silence filled every corner. Ethan carefully placed the violin case beside the piano before gently pressing one piano key with his fingertip. The single note echoed softly through the empty room. He pressed another. Then another. Imperfect. Hesitant. Quiet. Yet somehow alive. The following morning, Lily arrived to find Ethan waiting beside the familiar bench with a small paper bag from a neighborhood music shop. "I have something for your guitar," he said. Inside were new strings, carefully chosen after speaking with a repair specialist the evening before. Lily's face brightened with genuine surprise. "You remembered." Ethan laughed softly. "After everything your guitar has done for this plaza, I thought it deserved a little kindness too." Together they carefully replaced each worn string before the morning crowd fully arrived. As Lily gently tuned the instrument, the notes sounded brighter, warmer, almost as though the old guitar had found new energy without losing the memories hidden inside its weathered wood. She played a few simple chords before looking up with a grateful smile. "It still sounds like Dad's guitar," she said. "Only happier." Ethan quietly looked toward the thousands of windows surrounding the plaza. For years those buildings had reflected only steel, glass, and ambition. That morning they reflected music once again. He suddenly understood that healing rarely erased old memories. Instead, it gave them new reasons to keep singing. As Lily began another gentle melody and the first employees slowed their hurried steps just long enough to listen, Ethan realized that the forgotten music room inside his building and the weathered guitar outside its doors had quietly begun telling the same story, one careful note at a time. The next Thursday morning began differently from every other morning Lily had spent beside the old iron bench. Before she could even remove her guitar from its weathered case, two city officials approached with polite but serious expressions. One of them carried a clipboard while the other pointed toward a newly installed sign near the entrance to the financial district. It stated that public performances were no longer permitted within the plaza during business hours because of updated pedestrian traffic regulations. Lily listened quietly without interrupting. She nodded respectfully after reading the notice herself and thanked both officials for explaining the new rule. There was no argument, no complaint, and no sadness on her face. She simply looked down at the guitar her father had once carried through the same streets and carefully zipped the case closed again. Ethan had just stepped out of the revolving doors with 2 cups of hot chocolate when he saw the conversation ending. By the time he reached the bench, the officials had already continued toward the next block. "What happened?" he asked gently. Lily gave him a small, understanding smile. "They said I cannot sing here anymore." Ethan looked toward the newly placed sign and read every word in silence. The plaza suddenly felt strangely empty even though thousands of people still crossed it exactly as they always had. Lily accepted the hot chocolate with both hands. "It is all right," she said softly. "Rules are important." Ethan looked at the quiet bench where music had greeted every morning for months. "And what will you do now?" Lily thought for a moment before answering. "Dad always said songs can travel. I will find another place where people need them." Her voice carried neither disappointment nor resentment. It carried only quiet determination. Somehow that made Ethan's heart feel heavier than if she had cried. The familiar city bus arrived at the corner, but instead of opening her guitar case one last time, Lily simply waved goodbye before climbing aboard. Ethan remained standing alone beside the untouched bench while employees hurried past without noticing anything had changed. Yet to him, the entire plaza sounded different. The trains still rumbled through the city. Coffee cups still clinked together. Conversations still echoed across the sidewalks. But the one sound that had quietly transformed his mornings had disappeared. Later that afternoon, Ethan stood once again beside the grand piano in the company's music room. He pressed a single key and listened as the lonely note faded into silence. The room suddenly reminded him of the plaza outside. Beautiful. Impressive. Empty. He looked through the floor-to-ceiling windows toward the sidewalk below, where the iron bench now sat alone beneath fresh snow. Then he noticed something unexpected. Several employees had paused near the bench out of habit before continuing toward the building. They looked around briefly, almost searching for someone they had grown accustomed to hearing. They had not realized how much the music had become part of their mornings until it was gone. Ethan quietly smiled to himself. Perhaps Lily had been right all along. Songs did not have to stop every person. They only had to change one heart at a time. He reached for his phone and called his executive assistant. "Please arrange a meeting with the property management team, the community relations department, and the city partnership office tomorrow morning." There was a brief pause before his assistant answered. "May I ask what the meeting is about, sir?" Ethan looked once more toward the silent plaza before replying with calm certainty. "I think it is time our building learned how to listen, not only through its windows, but through its front door as well." The following week, construction crews arrived before sunrise, but instead of blocking sidewalks or raising new office walls, they assembled a small wooden performance platform at the edge of the plaza where the financial district met the public square. Warm string lights were carefully woven through elegant iron railings, several wooden benches replaced the old single bench, and a simple bronze plaque was installed beside the stage. It read, "Community Music Corner. Every voice deserves one listener." Employees arriving for work slowed their pace with quiet curiosity, wondering why their company had transformed part of the entrance into something that looked more like a neighborhood gathering place than the front of a corporate headquarters. By 8:15, a familiar city bus stopped at the corner. Lily stepped onto the sidewalk carrying her weathered guitar, expecting only another walk towards school after finding a different place to sing during the previous week. Instead, she stopped in complete surprise. Ethan stood waiting beside the little stage with 2 cups of hot chocolate and a warm smile that needed no explanation. "Good morning," he said gently. Lily looked from Ethan to the wooden platform, then toward the glowing string lights and the gathering crowd. "What is all this?" she asked almost in a whisper. Ethan handed her one of the steaming cups. "A place where songs are welcome." Lily's bright blue eyes slowly filled with joyful disbelief. "For me?" Ethan shook his head softly. "For everyone. You simply reminded us why we needed it." Around them, dozens of Walker Holdings employees quietly gathered before entering the building. Some recognized Lily immediately. Others only knew that something important was happening because their usually reserved chief executive stood beside a smiling little musician instead of rushing toward another meeting. Ethan nodded toward the stage. "Would you do us the honor of playing the first song?" Lily looked down at her old guitar, gently running her fingers across its polished new strings before climbing onto the small platform. She adjusted the microphone that had been placed there, though her voice hardly needed it. After taking one slow breath, she began singing the same melody Ethan had first heard drifting through his office window weeks earlier. "Even empty windows can learn to shine again." This time, no traffic noise swallowed the words. The entire plaza seemed to grow quieter with every verse. Office workers paused without checking their watches. Security guards stood still near the entrance. Cafe employees stepped outside carrying trays they briefly forgot to deliver. Even people walking through the neighborhood slowed their pace, drawn toward the gentle music filling the crisp morning air. Ethan remained beside the stage, listening with the same quiet attention Lily's father had once described. One listening heart had become 10. Then 50. Then hundreds. As the final note faded beneath the towering glass buildings, the silence lasted for only a heartbeat before warm applause spread naturally across the plaza. It was not loud or dramatic. It was sincere. Lily smiled with grateful surprise, placing one hand gently against the old guitar as though silently thanking her father for every lesson he had ever shared. Ethan looked up toward the countless windows reflecting the bright winter morning. For years, those windows had mirrored only ambition and success. Today they reflected people standing together, smiling at strangers, united for a few beautiful minutes by a simple song that had finally found the audience it had patiently waited for all along. 1 year later, winter returned to Chicago with the same gentle snowfall that had quietly introduced 2 strangers to one another, yet almost everything else had changed. Every weekday morning at 8:15, the small community music corner outside Walker Holdings welcomed musicians, school choirs, grandparents with violins, college students with acoustic guitars, and children discovering the courage to share their first songs. What had once been an ordinary stretch of concrete outside a corporate office had become one of the warmest places in the city, where busy professionals paused for a few peaceful minutes before beginning another demanding day. The bronze plaque beside the little wooden stage had become polished from countless hands brushing across its simple message. Every voice deserves one listener. Ethan Walker still arrived early each morning, but no longer because his calendar demanded it. He came because he had learned that some of the most important moments in life could never be scheduled. The untouched coffee that once grew cold inside his silent office had been replaced by 2 steaming cups of hot chocolate waiting beside the stage. Upstairs, the grand piano no longer gathered dust. Every Friday afternoon, employees were invited into the music room for informal performances, conversations, and quiet moments that reminded everyone there was more to success than numbers on a financial report. The empty office that had once echoed with silence now carried music drifting softly through open doors. Lily Bennett had grown a little taller over the year, but she still carried the same weathered guitar with the same careful smile her father had inspired. Its new strings had long since become worn again, proof that beautiful things were meant to be used instead of preserved behind glass. She continued writing original songs, and every performance ended the same way, with a grateful thank you to everyone who had chosen to listen. One snowy morning after finishing her final song before school, she climbed down from the little stage and handed Ethan a folded sheet of music. Across the top she had written a new title in careful pencil. The Building That Learned to Listen. Ethan unfolded the page slowly, smiling as he recognized the familiar handwriting that had first changed his life. At the bottom she had written one final sentence beneath the last lyric. Sometimes the greatest song is not the one we sing. It is the one we make possible for someone else. Ethan quietly folded the page and placed it beside the first handwritten song she had ever given him, both safely tucked inside the leather notebook he now carried everywhere. Looking across the plaza, he watched employees greeting one another with genuine smiles, strangers stopping to applaud young performers, and children discovering confidence beneath the warm glow of the string lights. The towering glass windows above no longer reflected only ambition or achievement. They reflected kindness shared without expectation, hope offered without condition, and a community that had slowly remembered the value of simply listening. As fresh snow settled gently across the stage, the old iron bench, and the busy sidewalks beyond, Ethan realized that true wealth had never been hidden inside executive offices, remarkable buildings, or successful companies. It had been waiting in the quiet space between one song and one willing heart. And sometimes, all it took to change a life forever was the simple decision to stop walking, stand still for a moment, and truly listen.